Hi everyone, I'm so sorry I can't be with you in Hong Kong to give my presentation in person, but I'm going to be doing it through this pre-recorded presentation instead. My title, as you can see, is Multimodal Pragmatics, Prosody and Gesture. And my talk will have three parts. First of all, an introduction about why we need to use multimodal methodology in pragmatics. Then I'll be talking in more detail about the methodologies I have been using in my research on multimodal politeness. And I'll end by mentioning limitations and future directions for this field. First of all, why multimodality? Several authors have noted in recent years a lack of analysis of prosody and gesture within many pragmatic fields. Culpeper 2011, for instance, notes that nonverbal cues receive relatively little attention in communication and pragmatic studies. In the field of pragmatics that I work in, which is politeness research, many papers make only fleeting reference to nonverbal modalities, if any. The table here shows the type of verbal paradigm that you might find in politeness studies in the Brown and Levensonian tradition, where it might be claimed, for example, that an indirect request, such as, "Could you lend me your car?" is more polite than a direct request, such as, "Lend me your car," or just, "Your car." But it's obvious that nonverbal elements will also feature in how the level of politeness and other pragmatic meanings are negotiated in real-world interaction. Culpeper 2011 illustrates this point with the example here on the slide, which, if said with a certain type of intonation, can sound like just a polite request. Do you know anything about yo-yos? But with another type of intonation, it can sound quite rude. Do you know anything about yo-yos? Gestures and nonverbal behaviors also communicate pragmatic meanings. In this example, we know what kind of speech act the flight attendant is performing to the passenger without having any information about the verbal content of her speech. She is indeed apologizing. I'm going to go now into more detail with examples of how prosody and gesture can communicate a range of pragmatic meanings. And I've tried to choose some quite diverse areas here: information status, turn-taking, speaker identity, and politeness. For the final topic, I'll talk in depth about my own research, whereas for the other three, I'll summarize just a couple of examples from previous studies that show how important gestures and prosody can be. Beginning with information status, it's well known that pragmatic meanings such as focus, topic, and contrast can be communicated through prosody. Ito and Spear 2011 demonstrated that English participants associated more prominent accent peaks with contrastive interpretations. For instance, when giving instructions to hang a blue drum on a Christmas tree, prominent accents such as "hang the green drum" and "now hang the blue drum" would trigger contrastive interpretations. In other words, that blue was being contrasted with other colors. Prieto et al. 2018 showed that focal information is not just marked by prominent prosody, but also with gestures and nonverbal behaviors such as head nods and eyebrow beats that are synchronally used with the prosodic focus. As for turn-taking, CA practitioners, of course, know well that speakers use prosodic means such as final falling intonation, lengthening, and also gestures such as hand gestures and gaze as well to manage turn-taking. Tessendorf 2007 showed that Spanish speakers use a brushing aside gesture to organize turn-taking, as well as to add information to the propositional content. Moving to speaker identity, Lempert 2011, in a very interesting study, applied the framework of indexicality to analyze the precision grip gestures used by Barack Obama in presidential debates. In one instance, Obama used the gesture repeatedly when conveying that his adversary, John McCain, is planning $300 billion in tax relief for wealthy individuals. and corporations as well. Lempert notes that this, in the first order of indexicality, merely indexes that the speaker is highlighting focal information. He then argues that in political debate it has taken on an extra second-order indexical meaning, namely that it marks an argumentative strategy which is known as making a sharp point, and in turn this discursively marks the speaker as someone who has sharp points to make and therefore is an individual who is crisp, decisive, strong on details, and so forth. Let's move then to look at how prosodic and gestural means are used to index politeness-related meanings. And I'm going to be talking about my own research here in a little bit more detail, focusing on the kind of methodologies that I have been using. When you're studying multimodality, it really helps to collaborate. I've been lucky enough to work with, on this project, the range of people listed here on the slide: Claudia de Maru, Bodo Winter, Grace O, Sven Gravender, Alex Paxton, and Hyunji Kim. And also, I've now started collaborating with Pilar Prieto and also with Iris Hupscher, who you may know for their work on multimodality in Catalan. Our data collection so far has focused mostly on Korean as well as Japanese. We have been collecting data and involved in collaborations with all of the other languages listed here on this slide. In today's talk, I'll only be talking about Korean and to a lesser extent, Japanese. Korean as well as Japanese are languages that have attracted much attention in politeness research literature. This is because these languages have highly developed systems of verbal honorifics that are used in deferential speech, aimed at status superiors and adult strangers, which contrasts with their absence in non-deferential speech, aimed at friends and age rank inferiors. Our idea was that these two modes of speech, deferential speech and non-deferential speech, are also realized on the non-verbal level. As shown here, you don't use honorifics towards the status superior, so you don't only use honorifics towards the status superior, but you also bow to them when taking leave, whereas you wave at a friend and of course drop the honorific language. So the bow, in effect, is indexing the same social meaning of deference as the use of honorifics. But is there more to this than just very iconic and visually well-known emblems such as bowing? We set off on a detailed investigation into the prosodic and gestural differences between deferential speech and non-deferential speech, starting with prosody. We investigated the prosody in Korean and Japanese deferential speech using experimental methodology. We did both acoustic production and acoustic perception. But starting with the production, we got our participants into the sound booth and we had them complete two kinds of tasks. For the first task, we gave them a situation. For example, you're in a car and the other person who is driving the car has missed a turn and gone in the wrong direction. What would you say in this situation? First of all, if this person is your boss, and secondly, if this person is an intimate friend. And then we recorded the productions that our participants made. And this is an example from Korean. This is towards the boss.
생각하기에 지금 이 길 지나친 것 같거든요. 저 여기 옆으로 빠졌어야 되는 건데 지금 돌아온 것 같아서요. 다시 한번 돌아서 가는 게 나을 것 같아요.
And this is towards the friend.
야, 여기 옆에 지났잖아. 아까 저기서 꺾었어야지. 야, 빨리 다시 돌아가.
Okay, so you might have noticed some differences for yourself. We'll come back to those in just a minute. But the second methodology, there was a second task. This was more of a control task. This time, student participants had to read sentences provided on a slide. For half of the sentences, which were presented randomly, the assumed interlocutor was a professor, and they were shown this photo of this professorly looking person on the slide. For the other half of the sentences, the assumed interlocutor was a friend. While reading these sentences, participants were shown a picture of their actual friend that they had provided in advance of the recording. Crucially, the underlying parts of the utterance for the professor situation and the friend situation were identical and contained no positions where honorific morphology could be used. This is a point which becomes crucial later on for the perception studies. Following a previous analysis in Winter and Gravender 2012, we analysed the productions for a whole range of global phonetic features as shown here. And basically what we found was that pretty much all of these features showed significant differences between the two politeness conditions. In other words, between deferential speech and non-deferential speech. The third column shows that there were not many differences between the two languages. Korean and Japanese mark the difference between deferential and non-deferential speech in near identical ways. However, Korean shows larger differences in terms of pitch, shimmer, and harmonics to noise ratio. The basic kind of phonetic profile of deferential speech in Korean and Japanese is lower pitched, it's slower, it sounds calmer, it sounds more monotonous. You might have picked up on some of that from the example I played you just before. We then used a perception study to assess whether these cues play an important role in how Korean and Japanese speakers judge the intended honorific level of an utterance. Can Korean and Japanese speakers actually tell the difference between an honorific and non-honorific sentence just from the way it sounds? The experimental task involved Korean and Japanese participants listening to pairs of sentence fragments taken from the read aloud task, which were identical and taken from parts of the utterance where no honorific marking could be added. Based only on the way that these short, decontextualized utterance fragments sounded, participants had to choose which one of the two utterances was spoken to someone above, which is an emic cultural category corresponding closely with deference in Korea and Japan. And just to show you how this sounded like, I'll just play
그런데
the
급한
two
일이 생겨서 김
instances here.
교수님하고 통화를 해야 할 것 같은데.
That's number one. And this is
근데
number
급한
two.
일이 생겨서 김 교수님하고 통화를 해야 할 것 같은데.
And they had to choose which one was the deferential utterance. In case you haven't worked it out, the answer was indeed number one. We actually did this experiment not just with native speakers of Korean and Japanese, but also with English speakers who had never learned Korean. The results showed that 70% of the time for Korean, participants correctly identified the deferential utterance, whereas for the English speakers it was only 58%. This was still statistically above chance. Japanese listeners did not do as well, presumably due to the fact that the phonetic differences were less pronounced in the stimuli, which came from the production data described previously. English listeners did not perform above chance for the Japanese study. I now want to talk about a current project looking at the gestural aspects of deferential speech in Korean, and which uses quite different methodology from the acoustic studies. This exploration of gesture comes on the back of a paper recently published in Journal of Politeness Research, which used quantitative and qualitative methodology to analyze nonverbal behaviors in Korean soap operas. To look more specifically at manual gestures, we had Korean students at a university in Seoul participate in two conversations, one with an actual friend and one with a professor. They performed 4 discrete tasks, as shown here. For the purposes of this talk, I'll focus on the Tweety cartoon retelling. When analysed statistically, this data shows us that speakers produce significantly more manual gestures when interacting with the friend than when interacting with the professor. Suppression of gesture therefore appears to be linked with deference. But the data also allows us to drill deeper and look at how participants performed identical gestures across two politeness contexts. Let's take a look at the example of gesturing when Tweety drops the bowling ball down the drain pipe. We can look first at gesture height. By measuring the point at which the downward gesture starts, we see that there is a tendency for the starting point to be lower down when interacting with the professor, meaning that the gesture appears smaller and less salient. Participant 2 used a two-handed gesture starting at chest level with the friend, whereas the gesture is made with one hand on top of the knees for the professor. Here are the images here. And let's take a look at the videos. These videos are going to loop. This is with the friend, so you see starting at chest level. And this is with the professor, and you see it's just taking place on top of his lap. The videos here are looping so that you can see the difference one more time. Participant 10, on the other hand, starts his gesture above head height and with a casual pointing motion with the friend, but at head height and with two hands with the professor. Let's take a look at this. So this is with the friend. You see starting above head height, and this is with the professor starting at head height. We can also look at gesture direction. Does the gesture go down or does it go off to the side? Now, of course, Tweety actually puts the ball straight down the pipe, but we found that some of the participants would represent this downward movement with a less iconic movement to the side or down to the side, and this tended to only happen with the professor. Participant 3 makes the gesture down and to the front with the friend, but down to the side with the professor. Let's take a look at the videos for this one with the friend. You see there's the ball, goes straight down the pipe, and then with the professor, here's the ball and it goes down to the side. When the gesture is made to the side in this way, it stays further away from the interlocutor and therefore appears smaller and also does not threaten the personal space of the interlocutor. We can also analyze hand shape. Participant 6 uses closed and curled fingers towards the professor on the right, but the hand shape appears smaller when she's doing this. So if I play the videos for this one as well, with the friend, this is the hand shape, concentrate on that. And with the professor, you'll see that the hand shape is a little bit kind of more like this, a little bit cuter, a little bit smaller. In summary then, we can see that interactants not only use gesture less when performing deference, but also use various means to make their gestures appear smaller and less animated. Finally, for this project, I want to mention a collaboration with Alex Paxton, which involves us analyzing the same gesture data which I just showed you before for interpersonal coordination. Interpersonal coordination refers to the extent to which interacting individuals become similar over time. The videos were analyzed using computer vision algorithms and a nonlinear dynamical systems analysis method, cross-recurrence quantification analysis. Basically what this does is that it splits the image in half, analyzes pixel change in the two halves of the image, and measures cross-correlation and synchrony. The results show that participants synchronized their body movements in the friend interactions. However, there was no evidence of time-locked synchrony in the student-professor interactions. Given the large power differences in Korea, it may not be socially acceptable to synchronize your body movements with those of a status superior. What our research has shown is that the pragmatic meaning of deference is indexed in Korean and also Japanese, not just through verbal honorifics, but also by prosody, gesture, nonverbal behavior, and even interpersonal synchrony. Thus, a description of deference that only takes honorifics into account is missing out on a whole swathe of multimodal cues. Just very briefly, I'll conclude with a couple of observations on limitations and future directions. One limitation of previous studies on multimodal pragmatics has often been their tendency to focus on certain prosodic or gestural properties that are assumed to be universal. This limitation is something we have challenged in our own studies, where we've looked at how a wide range of prosodic and gestural features mark deference. The challenge, though, obviously for the researcher, is how to capture all of these different features within one analysis. The second limitation is something that I and my team are probably more guilty of. In our previous research to date, we've tended to look at prosody and gesture separately. However, increasingly, evidence shows that prosody and gesture are in fact very closely integrated with each other. The challenge for the researcher again is how to capture this integration in the analysis. That's the end of my talk. I just wanted to finish, though, by saying that we should also think about other ways of analyzing the verbal modalities in pragmatics. So before I finish, let me point you in the direction of a talk tomorrow by another researcher in our multimodal politeness project. Tomorrow, Hyunji Kim talks about a study of lexical density in Korean politeness. Thank you so much.